The editor's note says this, quote, Lashia Clarendon, who identifies as transgender and non-binary, uses he, him, she, her, and they, them pronouns interchangeably.
What?
You, too, are now supposed to be drafted into this movement to normalize delusion. Yesterday, I was browsing the world of sports, and I came across an article that was so astonishing in its stupidity and confusion that it forcibly struck me. I mean, it really was the single worst piece of writing I have ever seen. And the reason it was the single worst piece of writing I've ever seen is because it is utterly incoherent. I want to read it to you. It's about a person named Lashia Clarendon, the WNBA's first openly non-binary and transgender player. Okay, it's by a person named Katie Barnes. Okay, here is the piece. I'm going to read you the first 3 paragraphs, and you will immediately not understand anything. Okay, this is a thing that a human wrote. Lashia Clarendon wrapped their hand around the back of a fussy newborn, looking up at them in the maternity recovery room at a Bay Area hospital. A nurse had just shown Lashia how to cradle the baby in a football hold, and Lashia rested the soft skin of the baby's back against her own left forearm and held the baby's head in her hand. Okay, so at the beginning, you're like, okay, so we're talking about a non-binary person who wants to be called them. Within the same paragraph, this person is now being called her. But wait. Baby C, they, them, because the baby doesn't have a gender either. Okay, we're now working in this bizarre universe in which a baby comes out. We know whether it's a boy or a girl, but we pretend we don't know whether it's a boy or a girl because literally you can change your gender up to the day you die. And then after you die and after your body decays and all that's left is your bone structure, scientists 1,000 years from now can also know whether you're a boy or a girl. In any case, they, them. Baby C, they, them, gurgled and squirmed at Lashia's touch. Lashia accepted shampoo from the nurse, silently wondering if it would be appropriate for black hair. With her right hand, she gently rubbed her fingers through the silky curls of Baby C's full head of hair. So far, it's a woman, right? A woman who identifies as they, them. That's what you can get from the first couple paragraphs. Here's where things take a sideways turn. It was December 21st, 2020, Baby C's birthday and first wash day. Lashia's wife, Jessica, she, her, had just given birth to Baby C by cesarean section after a 29-hour labor after carrying the baby for just over 41 weeks. As Jessica recovered, Lashia found himself alone with his first child. I know what you're thinking. What? He never expected to have these first moments alone with Baby C. Lashia and Jessica had planned for a vaginal birth and for these moments to be shared. Exhausted and weak, Jessica joined Lashia and Baby C in the recovery room 30 minutes later. Lashia held the baby up to Jessica's chest to assist with Baby C's first meal. As Jessica drifted off, Lashia placed Baby C back in the hospital bassinet. He removed his shirt and sat down. Lashia picked the baby back up, cradling Baby C against their chest. So, in the first several paragraphs of this piece, we now learn that Lashia Clarendon is referred to as, wait for it, they, them, her, she, he, and him. Now, this makes a mockery of language, right? You have no idea. You now have less information about Lashia Clarendon than you did at the beginning of the piece. You don't know anything about Lashia Clarendon. If you just read this piece, if you're an alien from outer space or a normal English speaker, either of the two, and you read this piece, you would not know whether Lashia Clarendon is a boy or a girl or anything else. It makes no sense. It is deliberate confusion. It's deliberate confusion. And if you mention that it's deliberate confusion, then you are called a bigot. If you point out that this is absolutely nonsensical, that the terms he and she and they have quite specific meanings in English. He refers to males. She refers to females. And they generally refers to the plural. Unless it is a they at the end of a sentence and it is referring back to a she or he antecedent, typically. But here you have all of these terms being used for one person. The only purpose here is to convey less information with language. It is to isolate you more. It's to make you feel more confused. For the sexual revolutionary left, confusion is the point. Boys and girls, they're not supposed to mean anything. They're all social constructs, unless sexual orientation is invoked, in which case it's not a social construct, it's a biological reality. But also, you can shape your sexual orientation and choose it over time. It can be bisexual or pansexual or gay or lesbian or straight at any time. You can identify as any of those things. But they are both biologically immutable and also social constructions, according to the radical left. And we have now entered the world of Michel Foucault, in which language is just power. The arbitrary shifts in language are designed to promote power, just as in an authoritarian governmental system. arbitrary shifts of the rules that you're supposed to know, and you get punished if you find yourself in breach of those rules. They are designed to simply re-enshrine and reinforce the power of the system over you. Radical shifts in language, where words suddenly don't mean what they meant 5 seconds ago. And where if you use the word in its traditional sense, you have now crossed some invisible line. You become a bigot. This is a way for the social left to rule your life. It is a way for the social left to out you, to treat you as a bigot. I have a new book coming out called The Authoritarian Moment. And one of the things that I point out in The Authoritarian Moment is that this power game has now infiltrated virtually every institution of our society. To even point this out puts you at risk of censorship from the big tech companies. To even point this out makes you a person who shouldn't be welcomed into polite conversation. We now identify each other as members of the ruling class, and there is a ruling class in the United States. The way that you are identified as a member of the ruling class, the people who deserve to rule, is you put pronouns in your profile. If you have pronouns in your Twitter profile is not an indicator that there was any confusion about who you were. We all know who you were because we have eyes and we have ears and we have minds, right? We can identify people based on objective characteristics. The whole purpose of putting a pronoun in your profile is not even to demonstrate solidarity because you've demonstrated nothing, right? We don't really know anything about your politics simply based on what pronouns apply to you. All it is a way of signaling that you speak the vocabulary, that you speak woke. It's a socially authoritarian method of ostracizing people who think in terms of traditional objective metrics. Now, how stupid is this particular ESPN story? I use this as an example because this is the cover story at ESPN magazine, by the way. Okay. So the reason I use this is because not only is this supremely confusing and designed to be confusing, there's an editor's note attached. The editor's note says this, quote, Lashia Clarendon, who identifies as transgender and non-binary. Right? Again, if you are non-binary, meaning you don't actually have a gender, how are you transgender? Are you a woman who became a man? Are you a woman who became nothing? Are you a woman who became a genderless widget? Like, what exactly are you? The terms transgender and not transgender suggest that you changed your gender from one to the other, typically. Non-binary means that you don't identify as any gender. So these two terms should be somewhat mutually exclusive. They are not, right? Lashia Clarendon, who identifies as transgender and non-binary, uses he, him, she, her, and they, them pronouns interchangeably. We do so throughout this piece. We also introduce the preferred pronouns for others who appear in this story and for whom pronouns are used. Okay, so instead of the editors doing what editors typically do, which is make sure that language conveys information. This is what editors and writers are designed to do. Right? There's a postmodern discourse in literature in which language is not supposed to convey information. It is instead supposed to enshrine certain moods, it's supposed to generate certain feelings, but typically the purpose of language is to convey information. This is true in the animal kingdom as well. Right? Whether it's clicks and chirps from animals or whether it is the human voice, the goal is generally to convey more information. Except now the goal is to convey less information because the true idea is to elicit from you whether you object to this and thus can be ostracized safely from the membership in the new ruling class. And this is nothing new. Right? There was an article, we talked about it on the show way back in April in the New York Times called A Guide to Neopronouns. So you are confused by all of this? Well, let the New York Times guide you through all of this. You will be more confused by the end than you were at the beginning. According to the New York Times, non-binary pronouns have become widespread. A 2019 Pew Research study found already that 1 in 5 Americans knew someone who uses non-binary pronouns. And then there are neopronouns. A neopronoun can be a word created to serve as pronoun without expressing gender, like je and jur. A neopronoun can also be a so-called noun self pronoun, in which a pre-existing word is drafted into use as a pronoun. Noun self pronouns can refer to animals. So your pronoun can be bun self, and kitten self. Others refer to fantasy characters, vamp self, princess self, fair self, or even just common slang like in itself. So is this for real, says the New York Times? Yes. And around any leading edge behavior online, trolling, hijinks, and bad faith collide indistinctly. For those unfamiliar with the culture surrounding neopronouns right now, it's likely impossible to distinguish between what's playful, what's deeply meaningful, and what's people being mean. Many neopronoun users are dead serious and are also part of online communities that are quick to react swiftly to offenses. A popular Twitch streamer who goes by AndyVMG recently apologized after jokingly tweeting that her pronouns were bad AF, which led many neopronoun users to accuse her of transphobic invalidation of their identities. AndyVMG wrote on Twitter, "It wasn't meant to mock people who use neopronouns. However, I've since educated myself on the matter and spoken to people who use neopronouns, and I see why what I said was hurtful. Okay, now, again, the idea here that these neopronouns, kitten self, express just the same amount of information as a person saying that the person, a biological woman, is both he and she and them. Precisely nothing. The only thing that it expresses is a person who is either unable or unwilling to identify with reality. That's all. But the whole point is that you too are now supposed to be drafted into this movement to normalize delusion. You're supposed to be drafted into this movement to normalize delusion. And this notion that personal identity, that how I identify must be reflected by the society at large. And if you refuse to go along with my moral vision of society, if you refuse to clap and cheer along, you have denied me my identity. You have undermined me as a human being. And corporations, because so many corporations are in the business of catering to clientele, right? This is what corporations do. Corporations are going to sell you what you want to buy. Well, right now, what people want to buy is a vision of themselves. And that vision of themselves can be anything. And so corporations are simply going to celebrate whatever you believe you are in order to make money, right? So this has led people on the right to say capitalism is the problem. Okay, capitalism is not the problem. Capitalism is just not designed to be the moral imprimatur. Okay, capitalism is the greatest system for the distribution and increase in wealth in human history, without a doubt. But capitalism is not inherently tied, the system itself is not inherently tied to anything beyond provision of services and products to people who want them. And so if you are a business and you are seeking to cater to people, and those people have immoral wants, capitalism will serve those wants the same way that it would serve somebody who has a moral want. In other words, the lack that we are seeing in American society right now is not the result of economics. The lack that we are seeing in American society right now is a result of lack of a moral basis, a moral foundational grounding in reality. The reality that we are embodied human beings. We are not just a free-floating spirit inside a meatball. We are actually an embodied thing, which means that our biology and our soul are connected. And that means that we cannot ignore our biology or treat our biology as though it were our enemy. But that's precisely what the left seeks to do. The left not only seeks to treat our biology as an enemy, the left seeks to treat you as an enemy if you even notice the fact that objective facts, which allow us to have conversations with one another, by the way, that if objective facts exist and you acknowledge the existence of these objective facts, you are now engaged in an act of bigotry, right? Because I'm denying your identity. Subjectivism now rules the day. And anybody who insists on objective uses of language that we can share, because there has to be a term that means something in order for us to both use it and understand one another. If you insist on that, you're now engaged in an act of bigotry. All of this is a power game. All of this is a power game. The confusion, the meaninglessness, that is the point. Because if you can make everybody confused, and then if you can use that confusion in order to instill in everybody else the idea that if you refuse to acquiesce to the confusion, this makes you the bad guy, well, then you are just as arbitrary in your use of power as most authoritarians are. And we have a set of cultural authoritarians who are joining us in the guise of tolerance and acceptance, which is not what this is. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.